Welcome once again to Detective Duo, a home for timeless voices and enduring mysteries, from the sharp eyes of Tommy and Tuppence to the hidden corners of England's past. Subscribe if you enjoy these mysteries, and let us know where you're listening from today. It began, as so many English afternoons do, with the gentle clink of china and the murmur of polite laughter. The Beresfords' garden in Surrey was performing its annual miracle. Roses in full blush, a lawn clipped to the inch, and tables shaded by striped parasols that gave the illusion of endless leisure. Tuppence had outdone herself. Sandwiches cut with architectural precision, scones rising like minor triumphs, and champagne that caught the light like gossip in a flute. "Tommy, do make yourself useful," she called across the crowd. "The vicar's wife is about to engage Mrs. Grenville in mortal combat over the raffle table." Her husband, balanced between amusement and despair, obeyed. "My dear girl, diplomacy at a garden party is a losing battle. You may as well ask me to negotiate peace in the Balkans." "Precisely why you're suited to it," Tuppence replied briskly, rearranging a tray with the brisk air of a general. She was in her element, social, observant, and, though she'd never admit it, faintly bored. That was before the woman arrived. She came through the gate as though she had been invited by mistake. A touch too pale beneath a fashionable hat, gloves clutched rather than worn, eyes darting across the lawn as if searching for an exit she had already missed. Tuppence, being constitutionally unable to resist a mystery, noticed her at once. "Tommy," she murmured, "that's a face that's lost its map." He followed her gaze. "Probably someone's cousin twice removed, or a gatecrasher with taste. Shall we rescue her before she throws herself into the trifle?" But the woman had already been cornered by a well-meaning neighbour, who began to chatter about roses and rainfall. Her responses came delayed, brittle, as though she were translating each word from another language, one made entirely of fear. When Tommy approached, offering the safety of conversation, she startled. "Oh, forgive me," she stammered. I thought—" "No need for forgiveness," Tommy said pleasantly. "Everyone thinks something at a garden party. Most of it's unprintable." The line earned the faintest flicker of a smile, then died. Her fingers trembled around her glass. "You're Mr. Beresford, aren't you? You and your wife were with intelligence once." Tommy's brows lifted. "A rumour that refuses to die. We've been respectably idle for years." Her gaze sharpened. "Then you'll understand. I had to tell someone, before." She stopped. The sound around them seemed to recede, the rustle of dresses, the distant clatter of a spoon, as if the world itself held its breath. "I killed him," she said suddenly, her voice soft but carrying. "But they'll never find the body." The words hung there, absurd against the hum of summer and the tinkle of laughter nearby. For one stunned second, Tommy wondered if he'd misheard. Then the glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the flagstones. "Tuppence!" he called, instinctively catching the woman's arm. "She's fainted," but she hadn't quite. Her eyes were open, staring at something only she could see. "He kept the letters," she whispered, "under the floorboards. Don't let them." Her body went limp. Tommy eased her into a chair while Tuppence hurried over, cool and efficient. "Heart attack?" she asked, checking the pulse with steady fingers. "No, fainting only. Get her water." By the time he returned with a glass, the woman was gone. At first it seemed impossible. She'd been there seconds before, half-conscious, pale against the wicker chair. Guests swirled around in sympathetic confusion, but she had vanished, leaving only the broken stem of her glass and a faint powdery residue on the rim. Tuppence stood very still. She didn't just wander off, not in that state. Tommy surveyed the scene. She couldn't have gone through the house without someone noticing. "Then she went out the side gate," Tuppence said. Her tone had shifted, brisk curiosity giving way to that razor edge Tommy knew too well. "The one behind the lilacs. No one uses it." They reached the gate. It stood slightly ajar. Beyond lay the quiet lane, sunlight fractured through the hedgerows. No sign of her. Tuppence frowned. "Tommy, she knew you, or at least knew of you. That wasn't chance." He nodded slowly. "And she mentioned letters, under floorboards. That's the sort of detail people don't invent when they're improvising hysteria." "Then it was real," Tuppence said softly. "A confession." "Or a performance," he countered. "She might be mad or lying or both." "Mad people don't vanish neatly through garden gates." They exchanged a glance. the familiar spark of adventure tempered by unease. Somewhere between the teacups and bunting, something had slipped into their afternoon that did not belong to tea and sunshine. The police arrived half an hour later, summoned out of duty rather than hope. The local constable, an amiable young man with more enthusiasm than experience, listened politely as Tommy described the incident. "So she said she'd killed a man?" he repeated, "and then disappeared?" "Precisely." "Could have been a joke, sir. People say odd things after too much champagne." Tuppence folded her arms. "I assure you, constable, this was not the giggling sort of confession." He reddened. "Of course, ma'am. Still, no one's reported a missing lady, nor a body for that matter. If you recall anything else, we'll let you know," Tommy promised, and closed the door. The silence that followed was thick with unfinished sentences. Tuppence wandered to the sideboard, pouring herself a small measure of sherry, her private antidote to bureaucracy. She was terrified, she said finally. Not drunk, not delirious, terrified. Tommy sat, lighting his pipe. If she'd truly killed someone, she wouldn't broadcast it over cucumber sandwiches. "No," said Tuppence thoughtfully, "but she might if she wanted to be stopped." That silenced even his scepticism. He watched her, the afternoon sun catching the copper in her hair. Tuppence in detective mode was a phenomenon both fascinating and faintly alarming. "Do we investigate?" he asked. She gave a short laugh. "You sound as though you're asking whether to order dessert." "Of course we investigate," he smiled. "I was afraid you'd say that." She ignored the quip, pacing the length of the sitting room. "Start with what we know. Pale woman, late 20s, expensive clothes a year out of fashion. The kind that says reduced circumstances with decent taste. Gloves slightly frayed, lipstick too carefully applied. That's someone hiding the edges." "Servant's daughter turned secretary, perhaps?" Tommy suggested. "A woman caught between worlds." "Or a wife out of place," Tuppence mused. "She spoke of letters under floorboards, old letters. Blackmail, I'd wager." "Meaning she didn't kill anyone at all." "Meaning," said Tuppence, her eyes narrowing, "that she might be next." Tommy exhaled smoke toward the ceiling. "You realize, darling, this could all be imagination. She may be tucked up in bed right now, regretting too much sunlight." "Then let's prove me wrong," she said briskly. "Ring up the local station in the morning, ask if any woman matching her description has turned up at hospital or hotel." "And if not?" "Then," said Tuppence, smiling with that unnerving brightness he loved and dreaded, "we follow the trail she left us, a confession with no body and a party full of witnesses who didn't listen." Outside, the evening crept in quietly, the garden settling into its twilight hush. The broken glass had been cleared away, the laughter forgotten, yet to both Beresfords the air still carried the faint echo of that impossible statement, a woman's voice trembling against the calm of an English summer. "I killed him, but they'll never find the body." Tuppence drew the curtains and turned back to her husband. "We've had worse beginnings." "Yes," said Tommy, tapping out his pipe, "but not many quite so polite." Breakfast at the Beresfords the following morning was not the usual cheerful affair of toast, marmalade, and mild domestic sparring. Tommy found his newspaper untouched beside the teapot, while Tuppence stood by the window, still in her robe, staring into the garden where the party debris had not yet been cleared away. "The grass looks perfectly innocent," she said, "which is exactly why I don't trust it." Tommy glanced over the headlines, political scandals, rising prices, the usual parade of human frailty. "You sound like a poet with a hangover." "I'm neither. I'm a woman who watched another woman disappear into thin air." She turned. "You're going to the police," he sighed. "Yes, dear heart, I was afraid you'd say that." 10 minutes later, the village constable confirmed their unease with the kind of calm that only genuine uselessness can produce. No missing person of that description had been reported. No unknown car, no suspicious activity. A woman fainting at a garden party. He'd heard of worse after too much brandy. Back at the house, Tuppence had the look of someone arranging her irritation into order. "She didn't drink," she said flatly. "Her glass barely touched her lips, and she was terrified before she ever saw the champagne." Tommy studied the glass the housemaid had saved from the wreckage. "You made them keep it?" "Of course. If we were in one of your old intelligence offices, it'd be evidence. Here, it's washing up." The glass caught the light. On its rim, faint as a blush, lingered a smear of lipstick. Not the fashionable coral shades of London ladies, but a deep rose with a violet tint. Beside it, the faintest dusting of pale residue. "Face powder," Tommy suggested. Tuppence shook her head. "Or poison." That word hung between them, chilling the air. For a moment the breakfast table became something else, a war room, an interrogation desk, a relic of all the years they'd spent chasing shadows that never announced themselves so politely as a guest with a confession. "I'll take it to the police lab," Tommy said. "They'll—" "No!" Tuppence's tone snapped like silk pulled taut. "If we do that, it vanishes. Lost under red tape. We keep it for now." He frowned but didn't argue. Experience had taught him that Tuppence's instincts, once roused, could sniff truth from comfort at 20 paces. By noon they were knee-deep in guest lists. The garden table had transformed into an impromptu command centre, littered with place cards, scribbled notes, and one particularly large plate of leftover eclairs. Tommy, who believed that investigation and pastry were natural allies, worked between bites. "Let's see. We had the Vicar and Mrs. Vicar, Miss Grenville, the Fairleys, 2 of your Women's Institute allies, and a collection of people whose names I forgot the moment they shook my hand." "She wasn't introduced," Tuppence reminded him. "That's what bothers me. No one remembers her coming in. No one remembers her leaving. It's as if she materialized from thin air." "Which would make her either a ghost or an actress. Given the hat, I'd say the latter." Tuppence ignored the quip. "What about the black car?" Tommy looked up. "What black car?" "The one Mrs. Hesketh mentioned this morning." She produced a scrap of paper. "She said she saw a motor car waiting by the lane yesterday evening. Black, polished, expensive. Number plate beginning with HN. She thought it odd because it was there for nearly half an hour." "Perhaps a chauffeur waiting for some society friend." "Or for our mystery guest," Tuppence said. "And if it was, she didn't come alone." Tommy leaned back, hands behind his head. "So, let's play it through. Woman arrives uninvited, blurts a confession about killing someone, then collapses and vanishes. Why?" "Because she never meant to confess," said Tuppence quietly. "She meant to warn us, or ask for help." He gave her a look. "You're assuming we're still in business." "We're always in business," she said. "The world keeps sending us puzzles." He smiled despite himself. "All right, Miss Marple, where do we begin?" "With the car," she said. "We'll walk to the lane. Mrs. Hesketh may not have seen everything." The lane curved away from the house, narrow and overhung with hawthorn. A few petals lay crushed on the gravel, pale as forgotten paper. Tuppence examined them with the solemn air of a botanist. "Freshly dropped. Someone drove here recently." Tommy crouched beside the verge, finding faint tire marks. Could be any car. "But not many would idle for 30 minutes, she countered. "Not in this heat." They followed the faint trail toward the main road, where the gravel ended abruptly at a patch of darker earth, as if a vehicle had waited there long enough to compress the soil. Tuppence crouched, touching the ground lightly. No oil stain, clean tires. Whoever was driving knew how to leave no trace. Or we're imagining ghosts again. She rose, brushing her gloves. Ghosts don't wear violet lipstick. Back at the house, the day pressed on with deceptive calm. Birds sang, a milkman whistled somewhere down the road, and yet the quiet felt staged, like the pause before curtains rise. In the study, Tommy leafed through the old MI5 directory he still kept, a souvenir of the days when he could requisition anything from a pistol to a packet of sugar with the right signature. "There was a case," he said slowly. "Holloway. Rings a faint bell. Classified business. Something about smuggling codes through correspondence." Tuppence looked up sharply. The message she hinted at. Ask about the Holloway case. What if she meant this one? She didn't send it, Tuppence. Someone else did. Or she did, before she arrived. The possibility set her pacing again, that brisk movement that meant her mind was already 10 moves ahead. Think. If she was connected to Holloway, wife, daughter, accomplice, she might have discovered something meant to stay buried. And decided to come to us, Tommy mused. Why not the police? Because she knew it involved people still powerful enough to silence her. That, Tommy had to admit, fit the facts too well for comfort. He poured coffee, his way of punctuating tension. All right, let's assume she was right to be scared. That residue on the glass. Poison. Someone knew she planned to confess and stopped her. Tuppence nodded, but not before she managed to say just enough to make us curious. She'd have known that, Tommy said. You think she meant to leave a trail? Perhaps, said Tuppence, or perhaps she only hoped someone would notice before it was too late. They worked until afternoon shadows lengthened across the table. The guest list dwindled to 6 names worth revisiting, none connected to a black car or a woman in distress. Still, Tuppence persisted, eyes scanning for the missing thread. At last she pushed her notes away and stood. I'm going to see Mrs. Hesketh again. She forgets things until she's reminded of them. Tommy looked up. You'll have tea with her and come back with 4 biscuits and 2 new theories. Precisely. She smiled faintly and left. When she returned an hour later, her expression had changed, sharper, resolved. She remembered something. The car's driver, tall, thin, wearing gloves even though it was warm. He opened the door for the woman when she arrived. And when she left, the driver was gone. The car pulled away with someone else at the wheel. A small silence followed. Tuppence sat, removing her hat with deliberate care. Whoever she was meeting never expected her to survive that confession. Tommy frowned. But she did survive, at least long enough to vanish. Yes, said Tuppence, which means she's either dead now or hiding. And we're the only ones who know she ever existed. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. Then we'd better make sure she's not forgotten, because if she came to confess something that dangerous, someone will come looking for what she left behind. Tuppence nodded slowly, eyes narrowing. Then we'll be ready when they do. Outside, a car engine started somewhere far down the road, too distant to see, but close enough to feel. The sound rolled through the quiet lane like an echo of last night's mystery, fading, then gone. Tuppence glanced toward the window. Tell me, Tommy, she said softly, do you ever get the feeling we've just opened the wrong door? He smiled, faint and tired. Always, darling, but it's the only way to find out what's on the other side. The morning began quietly enough, too quietly for the Beresfords' house, where silence usually meant Tuppence was either planning something or had already done it. Tommy was halfway through shaving when he heard her voice from downstairs, high, precise, and edged with astonishment. Tommy, come here this instant. He appeared at the top of the stairs, face half covered in foam. If it's another mouse, my love, tell it I'll be down shortly. It's not a mouse, she said, holding something between thumb and forefinger. It's a message. That did it. He came down, towel slung round his neck, to find her standing by the front door. On the mat lay a single envelope, thin, cream, unmarked. The handwriting across it trembled like a pulse, uneven, urgent, written by someone who either feared being caught or no longer cared. There was no post this early, Tuppence said, and the boy hasn't come yet. Someone must have put it through themselves. Tommy took it carefully. No stamp, no address, just their names inside. Mr. and Mrs. Beresford. The paper was cheap, but the ink fresh, as if written within the hour. He opened it. One sentence leapt from the page like a voice out of a dream. Ask about the Holloway case. He never died, but I did. The words were simple, but the weight of them made the room seem smaller. Tommy read it twice, then folded it back slowly. Well, he said, it's either a ghost with excellent penmanship or someone who knows precisely how to ruin my morning. Tuppence's expression had shifted from curiosity to something more dangerous, purpose. You know the name. I've heard it. He rubbed his chin, leaving a streak of shaving foam on his sleeve. Holloway, William Holloway, wartime blackmailer, nasty bit of work. Got hold of top-secret correspondence and tried to sell it to both sides. We spent weeks chasing him before he drowned, Tuppence finished. So he didn't. Tommy looked at the paper again. Officially, he fell from a ferry off Calais in 45. Body never recovered. Case marked classified unresolved. Then whoever wrote this knows what happened. Or wants us to believe they do. She took the note back, studying it under the light. Ink smudged at the corner. The writer's hand shook, fear, illness, or both. But the phrasing, he never died, but I did. That's deliberate, poetic even. They wanted to be understood. He smiled faintly. You sound like you're reading their soul. I'm reading their handwriting, Tuppence said briskly, and it's someone desperate to be believed. They moved into the study, where sunlight slanted across the polished desk. Tuppence placed the letter beside the previous day's notes, the champagne glass, the guest list, the fading lipstick smear. Each item seemed suddenly to fit together, as if someone were building a puzzle on their doorstep. "Suppose," she said slowly, "our vanished woman wasn't just a frightened stranger. Suppose she was Holloway's widow, or his daughter. That would explain why she came to you." "Came to confess," Tommy murmured, "but not about herself." He fetched the old MI5 file box from the bottom shelf, one of those souvenirs of their intelligence years that he'd promised Tuppence he'd one day burn. Dust rose as he lifted the lid. Inside lay memories, typed reports, coded telegrams, photographs with faces crossed out. A world they'd once belonged to, still breathing faintly under its paper skin. "Here," he said, pulling out a thin folder. "Holloway, look." The file was dated 1945. The summary read like a wartime thriller: intercepted letters, espionage payments, a final pursuit ending in the Channel. The last note, written by one Colonel Marchmont, stated, "Case closed, presumed drowned, no body recovered." Tuppence's eyes narrowed. Presumed. They never confirmed it. "No, and that's what bothers me. If he survived, he could have changed his name, vanished abroad. But why resurface now?" "Because someone found out," Tuppence said quietly, and tried to stop her. The logic was chilling in its simplicity. The woman at the garden party, the lipstick on the glass, the car waiting in the lane. It all began to align into something that looked like purpose rather than coincidence. Tommy leaned against the desk, arms folded. "I'll put a call through to Marchmont. If anyone knows whether Holloway's still a ghost or a man, it's him." "And you think he'll tell you?" He gave her a dry look. "He owes me at least one favour for that business in Vienna." Tuppence smiled thinly. "That's what you said before the last 3 rejections." He ignored the jab, picking up the receiver. After a series of clipped exchanges and long pauses, a familiar, gravelly voice came through the line. Marchmont speaking. "Tommy Beresford here." A pause. "Good Lord, I thought you'd gone respectable." "More or less. I need to ask about an old friend of yours, Holloway." There was a silence long enough to hear the hum of the wire. Then, carefully, "That name's not for casual conversation." "Then let's make it professional. I have reason to believe he might not have drowned." "Where did you hear that?" "Someone told me from beyond the grave." "Don't joke, Beresford." "I'm not. A woman, frightened, desperate, mentioned him before disappearing. Then a letter arrived this morning. It says he never died." Another pause. Marchmont's tone shifted, harder now. "Leave it. Whatever that business was, it's finished." "Is it?" Tommy said. "Because people are dying again." The line crackled, then went dead. Tommy replaced the receiver slowly. He hung up. "Which means we're right," Tuppence said. "He's afraid of something." "Or covering something," Tommy added. "And I don't like either option." Outside, the afternoon light had turned flatter, dimmer, the kind of light that made familiar rooms look slightly wrong. The letter on the desk seemed to glow faintly against the grain of the wood, a message that refused to stay quiet. Tuppence traced the signature that wasn't there. "Do you think she wrote it, our vanished guest?" "It fits. She knew about Holloway, and she knew she was being watched." "Then we're next." "Not necessarily," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. "But we'll be careful." She gave a small, rueful laugh. "Careful? You do remember how bad we are at that?" He grinned. "It's part of our charm." Evening crept into the room. Tommy lit a lamp. The golden circle of light caught dust motes drifting like ghosts of old secrets. They worked quietly, cross-referencing names from the file with addresses, trying to find any thread that might lead to Holloway's world. Family, partners, beneficiaries. One stood out. Eleanor Lane, widow, last known address, Bayswater. Tuppence tapped the name with her pencil. "Lane? The landlady said our mystery woman signed in under Mrs. Lane. It's her." Tommy exhaled. "So she's Eleanor Holloway, and she's been living under an alias." "Until someone found her." He nodded grimly, "and forced her out." For a long moment they stood silent. Then Tuppence spoke softly. "We should go to Bayswater. Tonight." Tommy hesitated. We could wait till morning. And give whoever's watching her another 12 hours, she asked. No, if she's still alive, she may not have 12 hours. He looked at her, saw the resolve in her face, and knew resistance was useless. Then we go, but carefully. Carefully, she repeated with a glint of irony. As they gathered coats and gloves, the letter lay on the desk between them, fragile, trembling, alive with its terrible message. When Tommy folded it into his pocket, it felt heavier than paper, as if it carried the weight of the dead woman's voice. Outside, the lane was empty, the air sharp with approaching night. Somewhere far off, a motorcar passed, a dark shape against the last wash of daylight. Tuppence drew her scarf tighter. You know what bothers me most, Tommy? What's that? She said, he never died, but I did. Yes? She didn't say when. The taxi drew up outside a narrow house squeezed between a tobacconist and a shuttered laundrette. Bayswater had the tired elegance of a woman past her prime, powdered, perfumed, and trying not to notice the cracks. The sign above the door read Rooms to Let, weekly terms. Tuppence stepped out first, gloved hand tightening around her bag. It looks exactly the sort of place where secrets come to rest, she said. Tommy paid the driver, glanced up at the lace curtains fluttering behind the first-floor window and murmured, or refused to. Inside, the hall smelled faintly of gas and boiled cabbage. A clock ticked with judicial slowness. The landlady, a compact woman in mauve, appeared from a side parlour, polishing her spectacles. "Good afternoon," said Tuppence, bright and businesslike. "We're inquiring about a lodger who called herself Mrs. Lane." The woman's expression froze. "Mrs. Lane, yes, she was here. Oh, a fortnight perhaps. Polite, quiet, always paid her rent early. Left in a hurry, though, didn't give notice." "When exactly did she leave?" Tommy asked. "Day before yesterday." That date fell precisely after the garden party. Tuppence felt the faint stir of dread beneath her composure. "Did she mention where she was going?" "No, sir. Just said she had business to attend to. Poor lady looked worn to the bone. Couldn't sleep, always listening for the post." "Expecting a letter?" "She got several. Same handwriting, always the initial H scrawled on the back. Sometimes she'd tear them up unread." Tuppence exchanged a glance with Tommy. "Do you happen to have one left?" The landlady hesitated, then bustled to the mantelpiece and drew out an envelope from behind the clock. "This came yesterday morning after she'd gone. I thought she might send for it." Tuppence took it carefully. The flap was unbroken, the paper thick and faintly scented with tobacco. No address, no sender, only the solitary H. "We'll see that it reaches her," Tuppence said smoothly, tucking it into her bag before Tommy could object. They thanked the woman and left. Outside, the afternoon sky had turned the grey of tarnished silver, and the street hummed with traffic. A newsboy shouted headlines about Parliament scandals. Somewhere a church bell tolled 5:30. "Well," said Tommy, "we have our letter, our lady, and an H. All we lack is sense." "Sense," Tuppence replied. "Can wait until after supper. Mystery can't." They dined that evening at home, cold chicken, pickled beetroot, and Tommy's uneasy humour. The letter lay between them on the table like a forbidden relic. "It could be nothing," Tommy said. "A bill, an advertisement, a chain prayer." "And yet you're afraid to open it," she observed. "I'm not afraid," he said, unconvincingly. "Just cautious." Tuppence smiled faintly. "You know, Tommy, I sometimes think you joined intelligence purely to justify your nerves." "Not nerves," he said. "Instinct." He slit the envelope. Inside was a single folded sheet, the torn edge of a newspaper, yellowed but recent. Tuppence leaned closer. It was an obituary clipped from the Times. Captain William Holloway, died suddenly, November the 4th, aged 53. Private interment. Tommy read it aloud, his voice low. "It's dated 2 days before the garden party. So she likely saw this," Tuppence said. "She saw his name printed as dead, again, and knew she might be next." He frowned. If he was alive all these years, who's being buried now? Someone who took his place, or someone he needed dead in his stead? Tommy tapped the clipping. And the H who wrote to her, if Holloway's truly dead, who's sending these letters? Someone claiming his authority, or continuing his work. She pushed her plate aside. It's all too neat, too deliberate. Whoever arranged that obituary wanted her to see it, panic, and expose herself. Tommy nodded slowly. Which she did, by coming to us. The realization settled over them with the weight of inevitability. The case had ceased to be curiosity, it had become inheritance. Later that night the house was quiet, except for the tick of the hall clock and the occasional hiss of a coal shifting in the grate. Tuppence sat by the writing desk, the letter before her, tracing its edges with one finger. "You're thinking again," Tommy said from the armchair. "I never stopped," he smiled faintly. "I know that tone. You've seen something I haven't." "Not seen," she murmured. "Felt. The rhythm of it. He never died. But I did. And now this obituary. Holloway's ghost is being printed and buried all at once. Someone is rewriting history line by line." Tommy reached for his pipe, unlit. "Why go to such trouble after 10 years?" "Because something unfinished has come due." He studied her profile in the lamplight, admiration mixing with concern. "You're enjoying this?" "Of course I am," she said softly. "It's like the old days, when the world made no sense until we made it do so." They sat in silence for a while, the kind that belongs to couples who know words are optional. Then Tuppence rose abruptly. "Fetch me the map of London." He obeyed, spreading it across the desk. She pinned the clipping to Bayswater with a paperweight. If she stayed there, she could have gone anywhere west by taxi, she said, but she wouldn't go far, not if she expected a letter. Tommy pointed to a circled street. "Holloway's last registered address, somewhere in Kensington near the park." "Exactly." Tuppence's eyes brightened. "The obituary says private interment. That means someone arranged a funeral, someone local." "So tomorrow," he said, "we visit the undertaker." "Tomorrow," she agreed, "we start among the dead." But sleep refused her that night. At 3 a.m, she rose quietly, not to disturb Tommy, and went to the window. The garden was drenched in moonlight, the world ghostly still, yet she had the undeniable sensation of being watched. A shadow shifted by the hedge. Tuppence froze. For a moment, the figure stood motionless, tall, hat-brim low, a cigarette glowing briefly, then turned and melted into the lane. By dawn, she had convinced herself it was imagination, but when Tommy came down, he found her already dressed, a half-drunk cup of tea at her elbow. "Couldn't sleep?" "I thought I heard something." "Something or someone?" "Someone," she said, "watching the house." He glanced at her sharply. "You're sure?" "I'm never sure until I'm certain, and right now I'm halfway there." Tommy's tone softened. "Then we move quickly." She smiled thinly. "We always do." By mid-morning, they were back in Bayswater, tracing the steps of the vanished Mrs. Lane. The boarding house looked even drabber in daylight, the paint curling like old parchment. The landlady met them at the door again, surprised but not displeased. "I did remember something," she said before they spoke. "Mrs. Lane received a parcel once, small, square, heavy. She wouldn't let me sign for it, said it was personal, burned the wrappings straight away." Tuppence's eyes lit. "Did she post anything before she left?" "Yes, one envelope, thin, with that same H on the back. She walked it to the post herself." Tuppence and Tommy exchanged a glance. "Thank you," Tommy said. "You've been most helpful." As they turned away, Tuppence murmured, "She posted a letter, perhaps to us, or to someone she trusted, but it hasn't arrived." "Or it never will," Tommy said grimly. Back at the curb, a black motorcar idled across the street. The driver's face was hidden beneath his cap, his attention fixed too steadily in their direction. "Tommy," she said softly, "don't look now, but I think our letter writer just found new readers." He took her arm, guiding her toward a waiting cab. "We'll take the long way home." The black car did not follow immediately. It waited a full minute, then rolled forward, slow, patient, as though it had all the time in the world. That evening, Tuppence laid the newspaper clipping back on the desk beside the empty envelope. The lamp's glow turned the paper amber, the ink shadowed and uncertain. "So this is what remains," she said. "A dead man printed alive, a living woman printed dead." Tommy looked out the window where the lane was quiet again. "And someone out there making sure it stays that way." She nodded, voice steady. "Then we'll make sure it doesn't." The letter, the clipping, the black car, the widow in grey. The threads were tightening, pulling them towards something unseen yet inevitable. When the clock struck 8, Tommy poured 2 glasses of brandy. "To the late Captain Holloway," he said dryly. Tuppence raised hers. "Whichever one he is." The glasses clinked, the sound small and final in the growing dark. The Holloway estate stood at the end of a long, overgrown drive, where the hedges had grown into one another like gossipers too ashamed to part. It was the kind of house that carried its sins in silence, ivy strangling its windows, paint peeling from shutters that hadn't seen sunlight in years. Even Tommy, who'd spent his fair share of time in questionable places, hesitated before pushing open the iron gate. Tuppence naturally didn't. "If one waits for courage," she said crisply, "one never finds the truth. Come along." The air was thick with neglect, the smell of mildew and old smoke lingering like an accusation. As they stepped through the door, the floorboards complained underfoot, not just with age, Tommy thought, but as though resenting interruption. "Charming," he muttered. "If I were a ghost, I'd haunt this place too." "Then you'd finally be useful," Tuppence replied, brushing cobwebs from the banister. "Look at the dust. No one's lived here in years." A hall of faded portraits lined the walls, Holloway ancestors staring with all the hauteur of people who'd never imagined their fortune might one day rot. The silence pressed close, broken only by the groan of the door swinging shut behind them. Tuppence stopped before a large portrait dominating the landing. A man in uniform, stern eyes beneath a dark brow. Captain William Holloway. His painted gaze followed them down the hall, unblinking, watchful. Tommy tilted his head. "He doesn't look drowned to me." "No," Tuppence murmured. "He looks guilty." The drawing room told the rest of the story. Ashes long cold in the hearth, books warped by damp, a whiskey glass half filled with dust, the ghost of comfort gone sour. Tuppence ran her hand along the mantelpiece and frowned. "Tommy, come here." He joined her, bending to see. Beneath a layer of grime lay a child's wooden soldier, one leg broken, its paint chipped but still bright. "Not the sort of relic one keeps after a scandal," he said quietly, "unless one couldn't bear to throw it away." The soldier felt oddly personal, like a whisper from the past. Tuppence placed it carefully on the table and glanced up toward the stairs. "There'll be more upstairs. There always is." The attic door was half off its hinges, and the smell hit them first. Stale air and dry decay. Tuppence coughed, pulling a handkerchief from her bag. "This is where secrets go to die," she murmured. "And where fools go looking for them," Tommy replied, though he followed her up. Light spilled in through a small round window, illuminating a room full of old furniture swathed in sheets. The dust was ankle-deep. Against the far wall a single painting stood uncovered. The same uniformed man, Holloway again, rendered in shades of authority and vanity. "Someone wanted this one visible," Tuppence said. "Why?" Tommy stepped closer. "Maybe it's all that's left of the great man." She leaned forward, fingertips grazing the edge of the frame, and froze. "Wait, the paint. Look here." The bottom corner had begun to peel, revealing a darker colour beneath. She tugged gently, and a strip came loose. Underneath, faint brushstrokes emerged, the edge of another face. "It's been painted over," she whispered. "There's another portrait beneath." Tommy frowned. "People paint over walls, not wives. Stand back." He took out his penknife and carefully worked at the canvas seam until it split down the side. The top layer curled forward like a curtain. Beneath it, a woman's face appeared, beautiful, sorrowful, and brutally defaced. A knife had slashed through her eyes and mouth, the cuts deep enough to tear the fabric. For a moment, neither spoke. "Whoever she was," Tuppence said softly, "someone hated her enough to erase her twice." The silence that followed was alive with implication. Then Tommy's practical voice broke it. "There's something behind the frame." They removed the painting from the wall. Embedded in the plaster behind it was a small steel safe, the kind designed for personal papers. Nothing ornate, nothing obvious. "Well, that's new," Tommy said, brushing the dust away. "Any idea of the combination, Mrs. Beresford?" "None," she said. "But I married a man who can open hearts and padlocks with equal ease." He grinned. Flattery accepted. Working by instinct and memory from his service days, Tommy knelt, testing the dial, listening for the faintest click. It was almost nostalgic, the mechanical rhythm, the tiny suspense of success or failure. After 3 minutes, the lock surrendered with a soft, metallic sigh. "Still got it," he said modestly. Inside lay only 3 items: a folded scrap of paper, a faded photograph, and a small silver key. Tuppence reached for the photograph first. It showed a boy of perhaps 8 or 9, solemn-eyed, standing beside a woman with a resemblance to the ruined portrait. The back bore a handwritten note: "Edward, to keep him safe." The diary fragment came next. The ink had bled in places, but a few lines remained legible. "March 3rd. He's found us again. I thought we'd be safe here. If anything happens, Edward must never know the truth about his father. The letters are locked away. They will destroy us all if they surface." Tuppence read it aloud, her voice trembling slightly. "So Holloway had a son, and she, his wife, hid him." Tommy nodded slowly. "Which means the boy would be grown now. Edward Holloway, or whatever name he's using. And the people who wanted his father's secret buried would want him buried too." Tuppence sat down heavily on a trunk. "Oh, Tommy, she came to us to protect him. That's what the confession was about. Not guilt, but fear." "Fear of the truth," Tommy murmured, a truth old enough to have forgotten its own reason. He turned the small silver key over in his hand. "This fits something smaller than a safe, a box perhaps, or a deposit drawer." "Then she left us a trail," Tuppence said, "and someone else is following it, killing whoever gets too close." She looked up, eyes sharp again. "We have to find Edward before they do." They spent the next hour combing through the attic, searching for further clues. Dust motes drifted through slants of afternoon light, falling on the remnants of another life, books with childish inscriptions, a broken gramophone, a woman's glove turned brittle with age. Tuppence opened an old wardrobe and gasped softly. Inside hung a single grey dress, delicate lace at the collar, still faintly scented with lavender. She touched it reverently, perhaps to take something, or leave it behind. They searched the pockets, the lining, every seam. Nothing. As they turned to leave, Tuppence paused. "Listen." A faint sound, not the creak of wood, not the wind. A footstep, deliberate, on the stairs below. Tommy motioned for silence, extinguishing the torch. They waited, breath held. Another step, closer now. Then nothing. After a moment, Tuppence whispered, "Perhaps it was the house settling." "Then it settles like a man in leather shoes," Tommy muttered. He moved to the doorway, peering down the narrow staircase. Only shadows and stillness greeted him. When they finally descended, the hall was as they'd left it, except for one detail. The front door, which Tommy had locked on entry, stood slightly ajar. A cool breeze slipped through the gap. "Someone's been here," Tuppence said. "Watching." Tommy examined the lock. "Picked clean. Whoever it was knows their craft. And they wanted us to know it." "Message received," he said grimly. They drove back to Sutton Mansions in silence. The photograph and letter lay in Tuppence's lap, the key glinting faintly in her hand. As the city lights rose around them, the mystery seemed to grow larger, like a shadow cast across all of London. When they reached home, Tommy poured 2 stiff drinks and handed her one. "To Edward," he said. "To keeping him safe," she replied. The words felt more like an oath than a toast. Tuppence spread the diary fragment on the table, tracing the ink with her fingertip. "He's out there somewhere, Tommy, the boy from the photograph. If the widow was his mother and Holloway was his father, then someone has been protecting a fortune, or a crime, for 10 years. And killing to keep it quiet," Tommy added. She looked up, eyes bright with that familiar reckless spark. "Then we'll do what we've always done. Start with a name and end with the truth." Tommy smiled faintly, "And somewhere in between, nearly get killed." "Tradition," she said. Outside, a car engine idled briefly in the street, then faded away. Neither spoke of it. Instead, Tuppence lifted the photograph again, studying the boy's solemn expression. "Edward," she murmured, "to keep him safe. That's what she wanted. That's what we'll do." The club was the sort of place that reeked of quiet corruption, polished oak, cigar smoke, and the faint hum of men pretending not to notice one another. Its lamps burned low, golden pools on leather armchairs. Tommy Beresford had always found the atmosphere comforting and faintly comic. England's conspiracies, he thought, were probably hatched over weaker brandy than this. He spotted Colonel Marchmont at once, seated near the fire, his posture ramrod straight as if still under inspection. The colonel's moustache, once magnificent, had thinned like his nerve. When Tommy approached, the older man started slightly, then forced a smile. "Beresford," he said. "Didn't expect to see you in London. Thought you'd retired to roses and bridge parties." "I tried," said Tommy. "The roses bit back." Marchmont gave a dry chuckle that died too soon. "Still making jokes. I suppose one must." He gestured to the opposite chair and Tommy sat. The waiter appeared with a deference reserved for regulars and secrets. They ordered drinks, and for a moment the club's hush pressed in around them, filled with the faint crackle of the hearth and the clink of ice. "So," Marchmont said quietly, "you're asking questions you shouldn't." Tommy stirred his drink lazily. "Depends who you ask. My wife insists curiosity is the only thing that keeps us young." "She's always been dangerous that way." Marchmont leaned closer. "You're digging into Holloway." "Just brushing off an old file," said Tommy. A name cropped up where it shouldn't have. "Thought I'd confirm the rumours." The colonel's eyes flickered, the look of a man cornered by ghosts. "Then take my advice. Leave the Holloway matter dead." The words were sharp, but his hands betrayed him. They trembled slightly as he lifted his glass. A small drop of whiskey splashed onto the table. Tommy noticed and said nothing. "Dead, you say?" he murmured instead. "But is he?" Marchmont's gaze hardened. "Officially, and that's how it will remain." Tommy smiled faintly. "Official words never did suit you, Colonel." "This isn't a game, Beresford." The older man's voice cracked on his name. "There are men still alive who'd do anything to keep that file closed. Holloway made enemies in places you wouldn't believe." "Oh, I'd believe plenty. I married Tuppence." The attempt at humour didn't land. Marchmont sat back, looking suddenly old. "You don't understand. This isn't about national secrets anymore. It's personal. It's money. It's blood. Let it rot." Tommy leaned forward, his tone almost gentle. "Then tell me this. If it's all so dead and buried, why do your hands shake every time you say his name?" Marchmont blinked. For a moment, something raw surfaced behind the mask. Fear, guilt, both. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then pushed his chair back abruptly. "I've said enough." He tossed a few coins on the table, enough to cover both their drinks, and strode toward the cloakroom. Tommy watched him go, unease prickling his neck. As he rose to leave, Archer, the club's doorman, an ex-sergeant with more discretion than most ambassadors, appeared at his elbow. "Beg pardon, sir," he said quietly. The colonel dropped this. He slipped a folded slip of paper into Tommy's hand. Before Tommy could reply, Archie turned away to hold the door for a departing member. Outside, the air was damp and heavy with London's winter fog. Street lamps blurred like halos in the mist. Tommy unfolded the note beneath one, the handwriting unmistakably Marchmont's. Hurried, desperate. Edward Holloway, alive. New name, new fortune. He stared at the words until they swam. Then, instinctively, he looked up. The fog moved oddly, shapes shifting where none should be. But when he stepped into the street, there was no one. Tuppence listened without interruption when he returned home. She was sitting by the fire, hair pinned loosely, a book in her lap she hadn't read a word of. As he finished, she closed it slowly. "So, the son lives," she said at last. "That explains the photograph. He didn't vanish. He reinvented himself." Tommy nodded. "And someone's decided to tidy up the past." Tuppence stared into the flames. "Do you remember years ago how we used to joke that the world ran on secrets? We were wrong. It runs on inheritance." She rose, pacing the room. "Edward Holloway must have changed his name, taken his father's fortune, or whatever remained of it, and built something new. But someone new, someone close." Tommy poured 2 drinks. "And now the people who remember the truth are being erased." "Which means we're next," she said matter-of-factly, taking her glass. He smiled wryly. "Your optimism is always a comfort." "Oh, don't fuss. If they'd meant to kill us, they'd have done it already." "I'm not sure that's better." She ignored the quip. "We need to find out what he calls himself now. That note said new fortune. He must have an empire of some sort, a business, an alias, something traceable. Tommy tapped his fingers on the mantel. "I'll make some calls. Cohen still owes me a favour at the Gazette." "And I," said Tuppence, "will look through the society pages. Men who inherit don't hide, they parade." An hour later, Tommy was on the telephone with the weary voice of Lon Cohen crackling through the line from Fleet Street. "Holloway?" Cohen repeated. "You mean that Holloway? The smuggler? The blackmailer?" "The same," said Tommy, "but younger. Son of the original, using a different name now." "You're asking me to find a ghost in a top hat," Cohen grumbled. "Give me something more." "He's wealthy, very. New money that behaves like old." There was a pause, then Cohen said slowly, "There's a man fits that picture. Edward Lane, financier. Crops up in all the charity galas lately. Big donations, mysterious background, whispers of a shipping fortune, been courting attention and avoiding questions." Tommy's pulse quickened. Lane, the alias the widow had used at the Bayswater boarding house. "Thank you, Lon. I owe you a lunch." "You owe me a holiday," Cohen replied and hung up. Tommy set the receiver down and turned to Tuppence, who was reading over a pile of clippings. "Edward Lane," he said. "Our Edward." She looked up, expression sharpening. Then Marchmont was right to tremble. That night the house settled into its quiet rhythm. The street outside lay silver under the lamplight. Tommy had gone upstairs to write his report notes when Tuppence, tidying the sitting room, froze mid-motion. Someone was standing across the street. The figure was tall, coat collar up, hat pulled low. He didn't move, just watched. The light from the corner lamp caught a gleam where his face should have been. Glasses or eyes. For a long moment, neither shifted. Then Tuppence reached for the curtain cord, drew it shut with deliberate calm, and went to the hallway. "Tommy," she called quietly. "Come down, now." He appeared moments later, pen still in hand. "What's wrong?" "There's a man outside, watching." He went to the window, careful not to disturb the curtain's edge, and looked through the gap. The street was empty. "Gone," he said. "You're sure?" "Quite." She met his gaze. "It was him, or someone sent by him." He didn't ask how she knew. After years together, instinct had replaced proof. "All right," he said finally. "We keep the lights off downstairs. No routine movements. If they're watching, let them watch shadows." Tuppence's lips curved faintly. "You sound like a spy again." He smiled. "Old habits. Besides, I rather miss the thrill." She laid a hand on his arm. "Promise me something, Tommy." "Anything." "When this is done, when we find out who Edward Holloway really is, you'll let it end there. No more ghosts." He hesitated. "If I promise that, we might never get to the truth." Her voice softened. "And if you don't, the truth might get us." The clock struck 10, its chime muffled but insistent. Somewhere in the quiet street outside, a car engine turned over, idled, then moved away. They stood together at the window until the sound faded into the city's heartbeat. Later, long after Tuppence had gone upstairs, Tommy remained in the darkened sitting room. The note from Marchmont lay on the table beside an untouched drink. He unfolded it again, tracing the words with his thumb. Edward Holloway, alive. New name, new fortune. He turned the paper over, hoping for more, and saw faint writing on the back, words that hadn't shown before in the dim club light. They were smudged, half erased, but legible enough. "Trust no one at the ministry, not even me." Tommy stared at it for a long time. Then he folded the paper, slipped it into his pocket, and looked toward the shadowed window. "Too late for that, old man," he murmured. "The game's already begun." It was the sort of evening London does too well. Expensive, glittering, and faintly absurd. Outside the Grosvenor Hall, a string of motor cars gleamed under the lamps like a row of docile beasts, each disgorging its cargo of silk, jewels, and practiced laughter. Inside, chandeliers rained gold across the parquet floors, and the orchestra was already soaring its way through a Strauss waltz at a tempo more suited to flirtation than dancing. Tommy adjusted his mask, black velvet with ridiculous gilt trim, and said, "I feel like a cross between a burglar and an understudy for Romeo." Tuppence, resplendent in silver satin and a domino mask of delicate lace, gave him a sidelong smile. "Burglar suits you. You look guilty enough to pass for fashionable. I'll take that as flattery. He handed their invitations to the attendant and glanced around. So this is the Lane Foundation's annual charity gala. Quite a step up from village fetes. Tuppence's gaze moved over the glittering crowd with surgical precision. Edward Lane has taste, or good advisers. Every banker, actress, and minor royal in London is here, which means if he's hiding something, it's hidden in plain sight. They drifted toward the grand staircase where guests paused to admire themselves in the mirrored wall. The orchestra shifted into a slower piece, the scent of lilies and perfume hanging heavy in the air. Tuppence produced a slender notebook from her beaded purse. "Tonight," she murmured, "I'm Miss Trent, gossip columnist for the Daily Recorder. I'm here to collect indiscretions. You, my dear husband, are my quiet financier who pays for the drinks." "I always suspected marriage was a financial trap," Tommy said. "Quiet," she replied. "Here he comes." Edward Lane made an entrance that would have impressed a stage actor. Tall, fair, and immaculately dressed, he carried his mask in his hand, preferring that everyone see his face. His smile was smooth, his eyes practiced in flattery. "Mr. Lane," Tuppence said, gliding forward with the confidence of someone born to extract secrets. "Miss Trent, recorder. May I steal a moment before you charm the rest of London?" "Miss Trent," he said warmly, taking her gloved hand, "I don't believe charm can be stolen. It can only be shared." Tommy suppressed a groan. Tuppence laughed, a sound bright enough to draw eyes. "Delightful! The recorder will adore that line. Tell me, Mr. Lane, is it true you've built your entire fortune in under 10 years? Lane's smile tightened. "Not built. Recovered. My father's ventures were misunderstood. I prefer to think I've restored the family name." "Restored," she echoed softly. "So you come from money." "Money and mistakes," he said, with a glance that might have been self-deprecating or warning. Before she could press further, a woman in crimson silk swept up, laughing too loudly. "Edward, darling, the orchestra insists you open the next dance." He excused himself with a bow. "If you'll pardon me, Miss Trent, we'll continue this confession later." As he disappeared into the throng, Tuppence's smile faded. He's lying, every word rehearsed. He's playing at remorse the way a cat plays at mercy. Tommy sipped champagne, and yet everyone adores him. Of course they do. Charming men are always adored, until they aren't. By 11:30, the ball had reached its most dangerous stage, the hour when elegance begins to wobble and the masks of civility slip a little. Tuppence moved like a silver shadow through the crowd, her small notebook open, her laughter light. She collected fragments, names, whispers, and one striking remark from a grey-haired gentleman near the buffet. "Lane's a genius, they say, but no one remembers where he came from, or who he was before." Tommy lingered by the staircase, watching. His instincts prickled. There was too much attention on Lane tonight, too much choreography. The man laughed with one group, excused himself, reappeared with another. Always moving, never still. "Like a conjurer," Tommy muttered, "who keeps everyone watching the wrong hand." When he next caught sight of Tuppence, she was standing by the refreshment table as Lane approached again. His expression was all ease, but his eyes, those eyes, seemed to take her measure. "Miss Trent," he said, "still working? You put every man in danger of confession." "Then confess something harmless," she said lightly. "Favourite waltz? Secret vice?" He laughed, a sound too deliberate. "I never confess. It ruins the mystery." Tuppence's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Then you'd hate to live without one." "Perhaps," he said, "but I've learned that secrets, once opened, rarely go back in their box." A waiter passed with a tray. Lane took a glass, then quite deliberately brushed a speck from his cuff. Tuppence noticed the faint dark stain there, almost hidden by the fabric. "Spilled wine?" she asked casually. He looked down, then up again. "Old habit, Miss Trent. I never notice the messes I make until they dry." And he was gone once more into the swirl of masks and laughter. By midnight, the hall had grown warmer, louder, the chandeliers blurring in the haze of perfume and cigarette smoke. The orchestra struck up the final waltz, and couples glided onto the floor like figures in a dream. Tuppence returned to Tommy's side, her cheeks flushed with both effort and curiosity. "He's every inch his father," she said quietly. "Smooth lies and sharper appetites." Tommy nodded. "Then we'd better keep up. I think the finale is about to begin." The conductor raised his baton. Music swelled, filling the hall with Strauss's Blue Danube, and then a flicker. The lights dimmed, brightened, dimmed again. A murmur rose, the music wavered, and from somewhere near the orchestra pit came the sharp, unmistakable crack of a gunshot. Screams shattered the rhythm. Glass broke. The chandelier trembled as people surged toward the exits. Tommy grabbed Tuppence's arm. "Stay down!" They ducked behind a column as chaos rippled through the ballroom. Someone shouted for a doctor. Others shouted nonsense. When the lights steadied again, a man lay sprawled near the dais, a younger man in evening dress, one of Lane's aides. Blood pooled beneath him, dark against the marble. Lane himself was nowhere to be seen. Tommy pushed through the milling guests, flashing his old intelligence voice, calm, authoritative. "Stand back. Give him air." Tuppence knelt briefly beside the fallen man. "Dead," she said softly. "Shot clean through the chest. And look, Tommy, the cufflink." He followed her gaze. The man's cufflink bore a familiar insignia, an ornate H. "Not Lane's monogram," Tommy said grimly. "Holloway's." Tuppence stood, eyes scanning the room. "Where is he?" Tommy was already moving toward the side entrance. The crowd parted just long enough for him to see a tall figure slipping through the door, the glint of blonde hair, the flash of a blood-stained cuff. "Lane!" he called, but the man didn't turn. They followed into the corridor, where the music was replaced by the echo of hurried footsteps. The service doors swung in the draught, one still ajar. Tuppence caught the edge. "He's gone." "Not far," Tommy said, listening. A car engine coughed to life in the alley beyond. By the time they reached the doorway, only taillights remained, a black motor disappearing into the city's veins. For a moment, neither spoke. The noise from the ballroom seemed far away now, muffled by distance and disbelief. Tuppence turned to him, voice steady but low. "You saw his sleeve?" "Yes." "Then we both know whose blood that was." Tommy nodded. "He killed his own man." "Or silenced him," she said. "Perhaps the aide knew what we're only guessing, that Edward Lane is Edward Holloway." A gust of cold air swept the corridor, stirring a fallen mask across the floor. It skidded to rest at Tuppence's feet. She picked it up absently, black velvet with the faintest smudge of crimson on the inside. She held it up to the light. His mask. Fitting, isn't it? Tommy exhaled. "We'll have to move fast. Once the police arrive, they'll turn this into a scandal instead of a clue." "We can't go to the police," Tuppence said quickly. "Not yet. Marchmont's warning, remember? There's rot somewhere high enough to smother this before morning." He studied her expression. "You think it goes deeper?" "I think it started 10 years ago and never really stopped." Back in the ballroom, the first sirens began to wail. The glittering guests, stripped of their composure, huddled like refugees amid the wreckage of champagne and silk. Tuppence looked at them, beautiful, frightened, shallow, and then back at Tommy. "Find out where Lane lives," she said, "before he decides we're his next waltz." He smiled grimly. "Shall we dance then?" "Only if you lead," she said. They slipped out a side door into the night, their reflections fleeting in the mirrored glass. Behind them, the ballroom glittered like a broken jewel, music silenced, masks discarded, and one truth beginning to surface through the smoke. The ghost of William Holloway had returned, wearing his son's face. The morning papers blared headlines about mystery at the Grosvenor Ball, speculating wildly about masked gunmen and foreign spies. Tuppence tossed one aside over breakfast. "They've made it sound like something out of a cheap serial. The only truth in here is that someone died and Edward Lane vanished." Tommy looked up from his coffee. "Which, in Fleet Street arithmetic, makes him twice as interesting and half as guilty." "Half?" she asked, arching a brow. He shrugged. "I'm leaving room for improvement." Tuppence stood, smoothing her skirt. "Then let's improve him. The Gazette mentioned a banking connection, Lane Investments. If he's really Holloway's son, he's been laundering his father's money through legitimate fronts." "Meaning," Tommy said, setting down his cup, "we start where gentlemen hide their guilt best, Mayfair." The Mayfair branch of the British Continental Bank was an elegant cage of marble and brass, humming with discreet wealth. The clerks moved quietly, their footsteps muffled by deep carpets, their smiles polished to neutrality. Tommy approached the manager's desk, hat in hand, all genial affability. "Good morning. Beresford, Major Beresford. I was asked to verify a matter regarding a mutual acquaintance of ours, Mr. Edward Lane." The manager, a narrow man whose eyebrows could have signed documents on their own, frowned. "I'm afraid, Major, we don't discuss clients." "Quite right," said Tommy cheerfully, "nor would I expect it. However, I happen to be handling some delicate family papers for Mr. Lane, terribly dull legal business, and I only need to confirm that he collected a deposit box on Friday last. Strictly procedural." The man hesitated. Tommy's voice had that peculiar tone cultivated in the war, a mixture of confidence and confidentiality. Tuppence, waiting nearby, added the decisive touch. "I'm afraid," she said, lowering her voice, "the matter involves his late mother's estate." That did it. Sympathy and gossip triumphed over policy. The manager's shoulders softened. "Yes, Mr. Lane visited us on Friday morning. He withdrew items from his private box. Letters, I believe, and a small key." "Ah, yes," Tommy said. "Exactly what we expected. Thank you, you've saved us a tiresome search." The manager looked reassured that he'd aided a good cause. Tuppence rewarded him with one of her warmest smiles before they departed. Outside, Tommy let out a low whistle. "Letters and a key. I'll wager both belong to the widow in grey." Tuppence nodded. "And if he went to such lengths to collect them, he's trying to erase something. We just need to find what that key unlocks." "Easier said than done, darling." "Then it's lucky," she said, "that I've already done it." He stopped walking. "You have?" "I noticed the deposit box number 312, and if you recall, the Bayswater landlady mentioned our late Mrs. Lane posting a single envelope before she disappeared. I checked the registry. It was sent to a forwarding address on the coast, a small cottage rented under the name Mr. and Mrs. Larkin." Tommy stared at her admiringly. "Do you ever stop being clever?" "Not when it's inconvenient," she said, hailing a taxi. "We're going to the sea." The train to the coast wound through fields washed in pale sunlight, the kind that turns everything briefly innocent. Yet beneath the calm scenery, both Beresfords felt the same tightening in their chests, the sense of moving towards something final. Tuppence watched the countryside pass. "It's strange," she said. "Every clue brings us closer, and yet I feel we're following the dead rather than the living." Tommy looked out the window. "Sometimes it's the same road." They arrived at a quiet seaside town that seemed to have retired decades earlier. The cottage stood apart from the others, half hidden behind wind-bent trees, its shutters closed, its path overgrown. Tuppence pushed open the gate. "No one's been here in weeks." Inside, the air smelled of damp and disuse. A clock on the mantel had stopped at 6:10. Dust lay thick on the furniture, disturbed only by a few recent footprints, heavy, male. Tommy bent over the hearth. "He's been here," he said. "See? The ashes are fresh. Someone burned papers last night." Tuppence knelt beside him. Among the grey cinders a few edges of parchment survived, warped, blackened, but not gone. She lifted one gingerly with her gloved fingers. The ink was faint but legible on one corner. "Confession prepared." They stared at it in silence. "She wrote it," Tuppence whispered. "The widow, the full story, and he burned it." Tommy straightened, but not fast enough. She must have left more than one copy. People don't call something prepared unless it's meant to be sent. He began to search the room, methodically checking drawers, cupboards, and the false bottoms of trunks. Tuppence joined in, her movements swift and sure. Years of adventure had trained the woman to read the language of hiding places, the slight bulge behind wallpaper, the unnatural hollow in a cushion. At last she found something in the writing desk, a slim brass key, identical to the one from the safe deposit records. "Another?" she murmured. Then he came for the wrong one. Tommy examined it. Or he had two boxes, one here, one elsewhere. Tuppence pocketed the key. "We'll find where it fits, but first, look at this." She pointed to the cottage's single-framed photograph, still standing on the mantel. It showed a woman in profile, elegant, sad, and beside her, the same little boy they had seen in the photograph from the safe. "Edward," Tommy said, "and his mother. It's her cottage. She kept it all these years. Tuppence's voice softened. She was preparing to tell the truth. That's why she came to us. The guilt, the fear, it broke her, and Edward found her before she could send it. Which means, Tommy said grimly, that confession would name names, perhaps even Marchmont's. He was interrupted by a sound, a floorboard creaking above. They froze. Tuppence's whisper was barely audible. "We're not alone." Tommy gestured for silence, moving toward the stairs. The next creak came from the landing. A shadow moved under the doorframe. Then a voice, male, low, controlled. "No need for dramatics, Major Beresford. If you're looking for ghosts, you've found one." Edward Lane stood at the top of the stairs. Without the charm of the ballroom, his face seemed sharper, colder, the polish stripped away. "Mr. Lane," Tommy said evenly. "Or should I say, Edward Holloway." A flicker of amusement passed through the man's eyes. "I'd prefer Lane. The other name doesn't suit my social calendar." Tuppence moved beside Tommy. "You burned her letter?" "I did," he said. "A pity you arrived before I could tidy the rest." "Meaning us?" Tommy asked. He smiled. "Don't be melodramatic. I'd rather you simply left. I have enough trouble without corpses cluttering up my view of the sea." Tommy folded his arms. "You killed your aide. He knew the truth, didn't he?" Lane's tone turned icy. "He was loyal, until he wasn't. Loyalty is a luxury I can't afford." Tuppence's gaze didn't waver. "Your mother trusted you. She wanted to protect you." He looked at her sharply, a flash of something human, guilt perhaps crossing his features. "She didn't understand. It wasn't protection I needed. It was power. And now, if you'll excuse me—" He stepped forward, hand moving inside his coat. "Don't," said Tommy quietly but firmly. His own revolver was already drawn, the movement smooth, unhurried. "You're a clever man, Lane, but not clever enough to dodge a war officer at 6 feet." For a long moment, the air in the little cottage thickened to breaking point. Then Lane's hand emerged, not with a weapon, but a folded piece of paper. He tossed it onto the table. "The rest of her confession," he said. "Half burnt, half truth. You'll never prove anything from it." Tuppence picked it up, scanning quickly. The handwriting matched the earlier fragments. It ended mid-sentence. "If I should not live to speak, then Edward," and stopped. She looked up. "You're right. It's not proof, but it's enough to start." Lane smiled thinly. "You're 10 years too late. The world forgets quickly, Mrs. Beresford. By tomorrow, it will forget you too." Before Tommy could reply, he turned and ran for the back door. The sound of his car engine roared outside. Tommy darted after him, but by the time he reached the gate, the black motorcar was already a dark blur on the coastal road, swallowed by distance. Tuppence joined him, breathless. "Let him go," she said quietly. "He's running toward his end, and he doesn't know it." Tommy looked down at the fragment in her hand. "He's left us enough to finish what she began." They stood together, the sea wind tugging at their coats, the sun breaking weakly through the clouds. Below them the waves whispered against the shore, like pages turning, secrets surfacing from the deep. Tuppence folded the paper carefully and slipped it into her bag. "We'll find the rest," she said. Every word she meant the world to hear. Tommy nodded, his voice low but steady. "Then let's make sure her confession doesn't die a second time." The advertisement appeared in the Times as neatly and innocently as a wedding announcement. "Missing confession recovered, all safe for now." Private inquiries concluded. No further action required. It sat between notices of property auctions and charity teas. Only one man in London would understand it as bait. That night, the Beresford sitting room was prepared like a stage set. Curtains half drawn, one lamp burning low, a tape recorder discreetly hidden beneath the escritoire. Outside, Inspector Marriott waited with 2 men from the yard, his cigarette a dull red ember in the dark. Tommy paced. "If he's half as clever as we think, he won't come." Tuppence, sitting by the fire, didn't look up. "If he's half as vain as I think, he won't be able to resist." The clock struck 9, 10. The street outside stayed quiet, save for the occasional passing motor. Then, a knock. Not timid, not hurried, measured. Tommy opened the door to find Edward Lane standing there, impeccable as ever. His evening coat was freshly pressed, but his face had changed. The polish remained, but the eyes beneath were hollow. "Mr. Beresford," he said smoothly, "I saw your notice in the Times. I take it congratulations are in order?" "Come in," Tommy said, stepping aside. "You've saved us the trouble of calling." Edward smiled faintly and entered. "I was curious, that's all. This missing confession, a fascinating turn of phrase, almost theatrical." Tuppence gestured to a chair. "You always did enjoy theatre, Mr. Lane. Sit down. You might appreciate the third act." He sat, crossing one leg over the other with deliberate calm. "And what role do I play?" "That," said Tuppence quietly, "depends on how honest you feel tonight." The first 10 minutes were polite, almost absurdly so. Small talk about the weather, about newspapers, about the tragedy at the ball, none of it fooling anyone. The mask of civility clung to Edward like a final performance. At last, Tommy said, "Let's skip the curtain raisers, shall we? You came for something specific." Edward's smile thinned. "Naturally, the confession. You have it?" "Perhaps," said Tuppence, "or perhaps we only wanted to see who'd come knocking." His composure flickered. "A dangerous game, Mrs. Beresford." "Less dangerous than the one you've been playing," she said evenly. "Your ade's dead. Your mother's dead. The truth is catching up rather faster than your fortune." He leaned back, studying her. "You're remarkably well informed." "Not as well as you," she said. "We only know that Captain Holloway faked his death, stole government funds and vanished. The rest, I think, you could tell us better." Silence stretched, taut as wire. The only sound was the faint hiss of the fire. Then Edward laughed softly. "You're good, both of you, but you've no proof." Tommy set a small notepad on the table, tapping it once. "Not yet." "Ah." Edward's eyes narrowed. "So this is the interrogation. I suppose I should be flattered." Tuppence's voice was calm, almost conversational. "Tell me, Mr. Lane, what was your mother's real name?" He hesitated a second too long. "Margaret Lane." "No," said Tuppence, "Margaret Holloway." His jaw tightened. "That name is dead." "She was, after all," said Tuppence quietly. "You made certain of that." The mask cracked then, not completely, but enough. His charm slipped sideways into anger, the veneer shattering like glass. "You think I killed her?" he hissed. Tuppence met his gaze. "I don't think. I know." He stood abruptly, pacing. "You know nothing. You meddle in things beyond your comprehension. My mother was a coward, a sentimental fool who wanted to destroy everything we built." "We?" Tommy asked. "You and the late Captain Holloway?" Edward turned sharply. "You speak his name as if he were still a criminal. He was brilliant, visionary. He saw opportunity where others saw ruin." "He saw theft where others saw honor," Tommy said. "He stole war relief funds meant for rebuilding. Hundreds of men starved while he disappeared with the money." Edward's face darkened. "You wouldn't understand. He did it for me, for us. He wanted a legacy that wouldn't depend on governments or gratitude." "And when he died," Tuppence said, "you became the keeper of that legacy." He smiled bitterly. "He didn't die, Mrs. Beresford. He lived long enough to teach me everything I needed. We left England, changed names, rebuilt. When he finally passed, I brought the money home, cleansed, multiplied, respectable, Lane Investments, the son restoring the family name." Tuppence's voice softened. "And your mother? What did she restore?" "She lost her nerve," he said sharply. "Letters, diaries, documents. She wanted to go to the police, talk of confession, redemption. She would have undone everything." "So you silenced her," Tommy said quietly. Edward's hand trembled on the armrest. "She was going to destroy me. Do you know what it's like to build a life out of ashes, only to watch someone scatter them again? I begged her to stop. She wouldn't. He broke off, running a hand through his hair. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that. The poison was quick, merciful. She was already half mad." For a moment, the silence was absolute. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. Tuppence's eyes never left him. "She wasn't mad, she was guilty, and terrified of what you'd become." He sank back into his chair, the defiance gone. "She should have stayed silent." Tommy glanced at the clock. 11:10. Haydock would be waiting for the signal. Tuppence leaned forward slightly, her tone almost gentle. "And the confession? You burned it?" "Yes," he said, with a ghost of pride. "Every page, every copy. You can search the world, you'll find nothing." "Oh, I wouldn't say that." She reached behind her chair and pressed a small button beneath the table. The faint click of the tape recorder filled the silence, its reels turning lazily. Edward's expression changed, first confusion, then dawning horror. "You—" "Yes," said Tuppence. "Every word, Mr. Holloway. Every word since you walked through our door." He lunged toward her, but Tommy was faster. In one smooth motion, he drew the revolver from his pocket and levelled it. "Sit down," Tommy said quietly. For the first time, the man's composure shattered completely. He dropped back into the chair, breathing hard, eyes darting toward the window. Outside, the brief flash of headlights signalled the waiting police. "You planned this," he spat. "You think you've trapped me?" Tuppence's tone remained maddeningly calm. "Not trapped. Revealed. The confession we advertised was only bait. Yours, however, is real." They heard the crunch of footsteps on the gravel outside. A knock. Firm. Official. Edward's voice rose, desperate now. "You don't understand. If this goes public, everything collapses. My company, my name—" "Your father's name," Tuppence corrected. He turned on her, fury blazing. "You righteous fools! Do you think the world wants your truth? It wants illusions. It wants success, even stolen." Tommy opened the door. Inspector Haydock entered, his heavy coat damp from rain, 2 constables behind him. "Evening, Mr. Lane," Haydock said mildly. "Or should I say Holloway? We've been expecting you." Edward rose slowly, the last of his dignity flickering. "You have no proof." Tommy nodded toward the table. "He's right here, Inspector. Proof on tape." Haydock picked up the recorder, nodding grimly. "That'll do." For a moment, Edward looked as if he might speak again, plead perhaps, but whatever words remained died in his throat. The mask was gone now. What stood before them was only a man hollowed by greed and the ghosts he'd created. As the officers led him out, he paused by the doorway. "You think you've destroyed me," he said softly, "but you've only destroyed what little remained of her." Then he was gone, swallowed by the dark outside. When the door closed, the silence felt enormous. Tuppence sat very still, staring at the flickering fire. Tommy poured her a brandy, handed it over wordlessly. After a moment she said, "She came to us because she wanted it to end. And it did, just not the way she imagined." Tommy nodded. Her confession destroyed them all, one way or another. Tuppence gave a faint smile. "Even us a little. I'd rather liked the illusion that evil was always obvious." He smiled back, weary but tender. "We'll build a new illusion tomorrow. Something quieter. A garden. Maybe roses." "Roses bite," she murmured, echoing their old joke. Then she rose, walking to the window. Outside, the police car's taillights faded down the lane, twin sparks swallowed by the London mist. Tuppence whispered, almost to herself, "Poor woman. She wanted forgiveness. He only wanted to be admired." Tommy came to stand beside her. "And now both have peace, of a sort." She turned to him, eyes soft. "Do you ever wish we'd never taken that confession?" He thought for a moment, then shook his head. Someone had to. They stood together watching the empty street, the firelight glinting on the glass. Behind them, the tape recorder clicked softly to a stop, the mechanical heart of a confession that would echo in courtrooms and newspapers for weeks to come. In the quiet that followed, Tuppence laid her hand over Tommy's. "Well," she said with a tired smile, "another case closed." He chuckled faintly. "Another secret unearthed." "And another night," she added, "when the truth didn't make anyone happier." "Perhaps not," Tommy said, "but it made them free." It was astonishing how quickly London forgot. A week after Edward Holloway's arrest, the city had already moved on to a new scandal involving a society actress and an improbable number of diamonds. The Times had printed the story under a modest heading, "The Holloway Confession Scandal, Financiers Fall from Grace," and then tucked it neatly between reports of a trade bill and a bishop's sermon. But in Sutton Mansions the memory lingered. The Beresford sitting room had regained its calm, books straightened, flowers refreshed, no sign of the drama that had once echoed through its walls. Yet the quiet held a different quality now, like the hush that follows a confession in church. Outside, summer had returned in earnest. Sunlight lay across the table where Tuppence poured tea, and the roses in the garden, stubborn as ever, had begun to bloom again. Tommy came in from the hallway with a stack of envelopes. More letters. The world is terribly proud of us today, though I notice no one's offering to pay our expenses. Tuppence smiled without looking up. They'll forget by next week. Heroes have the shelf life of milk. One of them's from Haydock, he said, opening it carefully. He writes, "The Yard thanks you for your cooperation. The confession tape has been lodged as evidence. Rather stiff, but that's Haydock for you." Any from the Foreign Office? Tommy flicked through the pile, then raised an eyebrow. Better. This one's marked confidential. He unfolded the letter and read aloud. The service appreciates the unofficial assistance rendered in connection with the Holloway matter. The discretion of Mr. and Mrs. Beresford is, as ever, beyond question. Your file remains open, for emergencies only. C. Tuppence laughed softly. Emergencies only, which means they'll send for us next time they misplace another skeleton. Let's hope it's a smaller one, Tommy said, setting the letter aside. For a while they drank their tea in companionable silence. The clock ticked faintly on the mantel, and the soft clink of china filled the pauses between thoughts. Then Tuppence said, "I went to see her this morning." Tommy looked up. "The widow?" Tuppence nodded. "They've buried her under her real name now. Margaret Holloway. I thought it was right. She was many things, but not just a mistake to be hidden." He watched her for a moment, the sunlight tracing her profile. "You always manage to find compassion for people who've made a dreadful mess of things." "She wasn't wicked," Tuppence said quietly. "Just afraid. Afraid of what she'd made of her son, of what silence had cost her. If she hadn't come to us that night at the garden party," Tommy finished the thought, "he'd still be out there, smiling for the cameras." Tuppence gave a faint, wry smile. "And I'd still be worrying about what to serve at the next Women's Institute meeting." He laughed. A terrifying alternative. The kettle whistled faintly in the kitchen, and Tommy rose to fetch it. When he returned, Tuppence was gazing out the window, her teacup forgotten. The roses nodded gently in the afternoon breeze, pale against the dark green leaves. "They survived," she murmured. "I thought the storm would tear them to pieces." "They're tougher than they look," Tommy said, pouring more hot water into her cup. "Rather like you." She turned toward him with a mock glare. "And you, my dear, are still far too good at flattery." "It's a survival instinct," he replied. "I've been married to an amateur detective for 25 years. Self-preservation demands wit." Tuppence laughed, and for a moment the heaviness lifted completely. But it wasn't gone. She glanced again toward the folded newspaper on the sideboard, where Edward Holloway's photograph stared out, no longer charming, no longer invincible. "Do you think," she asked softly, "he ever loved her?" Tommy hesitated. "In his way, perhaps. But some people mistake possession for affection. He inherited his father's ambition, but not her conscience." Tuppence nodded slowly. "And she died trying to give it back to him." There was nothing more to say. Some truths, once spoken, settled like dust, visible for a while in the light, then sinking quietly into the room's stillness. After a pause, Tuppence reached for the teapot again. "Do you know what's strange?" "Only one thing." She smiled faintly. "How truth never stays buried. You can cover it with lies, seal it with money, burn it to ash, but it always finds a way back to the surface." Tommy leaned back, studying her with fond amusement. "Not when you keep digging in the right places." She tilted her head. "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" "A confession," he said. "I rather like our kind of archaeology." They raised their cups, a quiet toast between partners who'd seen too much and still chosen laughter. "To the confession that destroyed them," Tuppence said softly. "And the secrets," Tommy added, "that built us." They clinked their cups gently. The clock chimed the quarter hour, and beyond the open window the faint sound of children's laughter drifted from the street. Tuppence set her cup down and leaned back with a sigh. "Do you ever wish we'd stayed retired?" "Frequently," Tommy admitted. "But then who would solve the mysteries?" She smiled. "There'll always be mysteries, even here." He followed her gaze toward the garden. A small robin hopped along the edge of the flower bed, pecking industriously at the soil. "Well," he said, "let's hope the next one involves less poison and more plum cake." Tuppence laughed, the sound light and warm. "If only life were that well behaved." "Life never is," Tommy said. but I'll take it as long as it comes with you. And tea. Tea first, she corrected, then adventure. Outside, the roses stirred again, bright against the fading afternoon. Somewhere far away, London continued its restless spin, trams clattering, papers rustling, secrets being written and rewritten. But here, in their little corner of peace, the Beresfords sat together, hands brushing on the table, the air between them filled with all the unspoken words of long partnership and quiet triumph. Tuppence reached across and touched his wrist. "You know," she said softly, "I think the garden looks rather beautiful after a storm." Tommy smiled. "It always does, old thing. That's when everything's washed clean."